My name is Emily, and for as long as I can remember, I've always been the responsible one. The one who kept things together when they fell apart. The one who stayed up late to help my little brother with his homework or took care of the house when Dad was working long hours. I've always been there. The steady presence. The one who could be counted on no matter what. But somehow, in my family, it's never felt like enough. I'm 26 now, and I've spent most of my life walking on eggshells around my dad and the ever-changing cast of people in his life. I'm the kind of person who doesn't like confrontation, the kind who keeps their thoughts to themselves, even when it eats them up inside. But it's hard to ignore the feeling that I've been left behind, pushed to the side for people who don't even know what it means to respect someone else's boundaries. I've tried, more times than I can count, to make peace with the way things are. But I've always been second in line, second to my dad's work, second to my stepmom, second to my little brother's needs, and second to my own desires. It wasn't always this way, though. There was a time when it was just me and Dad. We had our own little world. We were tight-knit, partners in crime. I was the apple of his eye, and he was my hero. My mom left when I was just 5 years old, and my dad never remarried. He was a hard-working, loving father, doing the best he could to raise me on his own. I never felt deprived. We lived modestly, but we were happy. I didn't have all the luxuries other kids had, but I didn't care. I had Dad, and that was enough for me. Then came Sarah. It started innocently enough. She was Dad's coworker, a nice woman, sweet and attentive, always coming over for dinner and talking about her 2 kids, Tim and Ben. I didn't think much of it at first. I was just happy to see Dad happy. He'd been lonely for so long, and Sarah seemed to be a good match for him. She had a bright smile and a kind laugh. It seemed harmless. She was the kind of woman who would always tell me how pretty I looked or compliment me on my grades. I liked her, and she liked me. But as time went on, things started to shift in ways I didn't understand. One night, about a year after Sarah started coming around, I came home from a late shift at work to find them sitting on the couch, looking at me nervously. I could sense the tension before they even spoke. "Emily," Dad said, "there's something we need to talk to you about." I could feel the weight of the conversation before he even opened his mouth. I sat down, already bracing myself for something I didn't want to hear. "We've been thinking, Sarah and I," Dad started, avoiding eye contact, "and we think it's time for us to take the next step." I nodded, trying to hide the unease that was creeping in. "What do you mean?" I asked. "We've decided to get married," Sarah said with a smile, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. At that moment, something inside me shifted. I knew things were going to change, but I didn't realize just how much. I wanted to be happy for them. Truly, I did. But I couldn't help feeling like my whole world was crumbling beneath me. The thought of losing my dad, of him no longer being solely mine, made my chest tighten with anxiety. I'd seen it before, in movies and books. The story of the step-family that came in and disrupted everything. It never ended well. Over the next few months, the changes became more noticeable. Sarah's kids, Tim and Ben, started spending more time at our house. At first, it was just weekends, and I didn't mind. But then it became a weekday too. Their toys started to pile up in the living room, their voices echoing in every room of the house. Suddenly, I wasn't the only child anymore. Suddenly, I wasn't the center of attention. The day they moved in for good is still burned into my memory. I was working my part-time job at a local coffee shop when I received a text from Dad. "We're moving Sarah and the boys in today. Hope you're okay with that?" I read the message twice, trying to understand it. I was still at work when they showed up with boxes and bags, and suddenly our quiet house became a chaotic mess of new people, new things, new rules. I walked in after my shift to find Sarah in the kitchen, unpacking and putting away food, while the boys ran around, knocking over everything in their path. I tried to keep the peace, to just roll with the changes, but every time I tried to have a conversation with my dad about how I was feeling, it felt like he didn't hear me. I was suddenly just a background figure in his life, overshadowed by his new family. It wasn't long before the little things started to get under my skin. I had to give up my room for one of the boys, Tim, who was 8. I could tell that it wasn't even a question for my dad. He didn't even ask me if it was okay. It was just assumed that I would give up my space. I didn't even have a say in the matter. I ended up moving into the basement, a small, cramped space that wasn't really mine. I tried to make it work. I set up a desk and created a little work nook for myself. but it wasn't the same. It didn't feel like home. My room had been my sanctuary, a place where I could escape everything, but now it was just another casualty of the changes that were happening around me. The final straw came one evening, a few months later. I was sitting in the living room, trying to relax after a long day, when Sarah came in with her 2 kids, Tim and Ben, both of them laughing and arguing over something. I wasn't in the mood for it. I tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. They were loud, disruptive, and I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. I snapped. "Can you guys be quiet for just a minute?" I shouted. I immediately regretted it, but I couldn't stop the frustration from pouring out. "I'm trying to relax here." Sarah turned around, her face hardening. "You need to get over yourself, Emily," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a family now. You need to learn how to share space with people." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I had been trying so hard to make things work, to be patient, to understand, but it was never enough. My dad just stood there, silent, as Sarah continued, "You're acting like a spoiled little kid. This is our home now. You're going to have to learn to live with it." I stormed off to my basement room, my chest tight with anger and hurt. It wasn't just the fact that she had moved in and taken over my life. It was that my dad was letting her do it. I had always been there for him. I had always been the one to take care of things when he needed me. But now, it felt like I didn't even exist to him. He had his new family, his new life, and I was just some afterthought. I spent the next few days avoiding the house as much as possible, working late, staying out with friends, doing whatever I could to avoid the suffocating feeling that came with being there. But it didn't matter. No matter how much I tried to escape, I was still trapped in the same house, in the same situation. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't keep being second to Sarah, second to Tim and Ben, second to everyone but myself. The tension at home kept building over the next few months. I tried to be patient. I really did. I kept telling myself that things would get better, that maybe eventually my dad would realize how much I was struggling with the changes. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The space I had once had in my father's life was shrinking, slowly being overtaken by Sarah, her kids, and their needs. It felt like I was being erased, like I didn't matter as much anymore. The financial strain was the first real sign that things were shifting. It started small at first. Sarah's kids needed things: new clothes, school supplies, toys, and of course my dad was more than happy to pick up the tab. But then it wasn't just their needs. It was the house's bills, the mortgage, the groceries, the utilities. Suddenly, it felt like my father had forgotten that he had a daughter who was contributing too. One day, after getting back from my second job at the local diner, I found a letter on the kitchen counter addressed to me. It was an invoice for the upcoming water bill. At first, I thought it was just an oversight, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a bill that I wasn't supposed to be responsible for. My dad had given me the task of handling my own utilities, but this was different. This was a bill for the entire house, and it was now my responsibility to pay. I took a deep breath and walked upstairs to find my dad. He was in his office, typing away on his computer, completely oblivious to what was happening downstairs. I knocked on the door, trying to calm the growing frustration in my chest. "Dad?" I said, stepping inside. He barely looked up from his screen. "What is it, Em?" I held out the bill, my hand trembling slightly. "This came today. Why am I being asked to pay this?" "This is the house's water bill, not just mine." He glanced at the letter for a moment, then let out a tired sigh. "Oh, that! We're a little short this month, and Sarah and I thought it'd be easier if you just took care of it." I blinked in disbelief. "I don't have the money for this, Dad. I'm already paying my rent, my utilities, and most of the groceries. Why can't you cover it like you used to?" "I told you, Em," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. "Money's tight. Sarah and I have other expenses to manage with the kids. You're old enough now, and you have a good job. You should be able to handle it." I felt a rush of heat flood my face, a mixture of anger and helplessness. I had already been working 2 jobs just to keep up with the rent in my tiny basement room. I had been covering my own bills for months, but now my father was expecting me to shoulder the weight of the whole house. I swallowed hard. "This isn't fair, Dad. I've been paying my share for months, and now you want me to pay for everything else too? Why are you treating me like the family bank?" His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of irritation flashing across his face. "This isn't about fairness, Emily. This is about family. Sarah and her kids need help right now, and we're all in this together. I could feel the knot tightening in my chest. I tried to hold back tears, but the frustration was overwhelming. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice shaking. "I've been here. I've been helping. I've been contributing. But I'm just supposed to keep giving until there's nothing left for me?" My dad's expression hardened, and he crossed his arms over his chest. "You're being dramatic. It's just a few bills. You're acting like we're asking for everything. But it wasn't just a few bills. It wasn't just money. It was the way I was being treated. Like my needs didn't matter anymore. Like I wasn't even a part of this family. Just a source of income to fill the gaps Sarah and her kids had left behind." I walked away from the conversation, feeling empty. But I knew deep down that this wasn't going to be the last time I was asked to pick up the slack. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle. I was being used, and it hurt more than I could put into words. The next few weeks were even worse. The house became more crowded as Sarah's kids grew accustomed to living here full-time. The constant noise, the mess, and the chaos felt suffocating. But what stung the most was how quickly Sarah began to rely on me for everything. One night, she called me from the grocery store, asking if I could pick up a few things. I didn't mind at first. I had the time, and I wanted to help. But when I got to the store, I realized that her list wasn't just a few items. It was a full cart. I texted her, "Hey Sarah, this is a lot. Are you sure you need all of this?" She responded quickly, "Yeah, the kids are growing fast, and you can help out, right?" I stared at the text, my heart sinking. I was already paying my share of the bills, and now I was expected to take care of the household's grocery bill too? I was livid, but I didn't want to cause a scene, so I swallowed my frustration and paid for the groceries. The moment I set the bags down on the kitchen counter, Sarah appeared, her face lighting up as she started unloading the items. "Thanks so much, Emily. You're really saving us." I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, I was boiling. "No problem," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just don't forget that I'm covering my own bills here. I'm not your personal bank." She didn't hear me. She didn't care. The breaking point came when Sarah asked me to watch the kids for the weekend while she and my dad went away. I was exhausted from work and felt like I hadn't had a moment to myself in months. I wasn't sure I could handle another weekend of babysitting, but when I told Sarah I wasn't available, she gave me that familiar, pleading look. "You're the only one who can help us out, Emily. We're trying to get away for a little break." I knew what that meant. They were asking me to put my life on hold for them yet again. I agreed, reluctantly, knowing that I'd be stuck with the kids while they enjoyed their weekend without a care in the world. That weekend was a blur. Tim and Ben were as loud and demanding as ever, and Sarah and Dad were unreachable, lost in their own bubble. I spent the whole time trying to keep the house in one piece while my dad and Sarah had their romantic getaway. By the time they came back, I was at my wit's end. I hadn't slept properly in days, and the house was messier than ever. When Sarah walked in with a bag full of souvenirs and a bright smile, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of resentment. "Thanks for holding down the fort, Em," she said, practically skipping past me. I was done. Done being the one who always had to sacrifice. Done being the one who always picked up the pieces. And when I went upstairs to my tiny room to unwind, I realized something that made my blood run cold. My father hadn't even noticed. I was invisible. It was time for me to stop letting them take advantage of me. I had been quiet for too long, but now I knew I had to stand up for myself. I wasn't just some person to use when they needed help. I was a part of this family, and it was time they started treating me like one. The first step was to stop enabling their behavior. The second, taking control of my life. I wasn't going to be their unpaid servant anymore. It was time to put myself first. But I didn't realize just how much I was about to change the dynamics of this household. Things were about to get a lot worse before they got better. I thought things couldn't get worse, but they did. It's funny how, when you're stuck in a situation, you don't see how deep it's getting until you're already drowning. I had tried to keep the peace for so long, tried to convince myself that I could keep making sacrifices, that it would all somehow pay off. But now, every day felt like a new betrayal. It started with the small things, comments here and there that dug at me like tiny, unseen knives. When I'd walk into the kitchen, I could hear Sarah telling Dad how grateful she was for everything she had, how I was such a big help with the boys. I wanted to scream every time I heard that. Big help? I was doing everything. I was cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, picking up after everyone, and still, it wasn't enough. But what hurt the most was the way my dad treated me. Or, more accurately, the way he didn't treat me. He was distant, always distracted by work or Sarah. When I tried to talk to him about how I was feeling, about how everything seemed to be falling apart, he'd dismiss it as if I were being dramatic. He'd say, "This is a family, Em. You need to learn to be part of it." I didn't want to be part of this version of the family. Not this one, where I was an afterthought. But it wasn't just the emotional neglect that pushed me over the edge. No, that would have been bearable. What really broke me was the financial betrayal. The moment I realized I had been used, taken advantage of, not just by Sarah, but by my own father. It was a Wednesday evening when it all came crashing down. I had just returned from my shift at the diner and was tired from the constant juggling act. I needed some quiet. I needed to not be around Sarah's kids or my dad's passive indifference. I went into the kitchen, looking for something to eat, and that's when I saw it. There, on the counter, was an envelope with my name on it. It looked official. My stomach churned with unease as I picked it up and opened it. The moment I saw the words, "overdue payment," my heart sank. It was another bill, this one for the electric company. But this wasn't just a regular bill. This one was marked with red letters, "Final Notice." I could feel my blood pressure rising as I flipped through the pages. It was a bill that had been accumulating over the past 3 months. 3 months of unpaid electricity for the entire house. And of course, the name on the account wasn't just mine. I was on the hook for this. I had paid my own bills for months, but the moment my father and Sarah couldn't keep up, they had added their debts to mine. They had silently passed the buck on to me, expecting me to pay it all. My eyes blurred as I read the final line. Final payment due in full, $1,600. I felt a sickening wave of betrayal. This wasn't just a small oversight. This wasn't just something I could ignore. They had been running up bills in my name without telling me, without asking me. They had taken advantage of my sense of responsibility and my quiet compliance. And now, they expected me to foot the bill for their choices. My hand trembled as I set the bill down, trying to process it. The world around me felt like it was spinning. My father, my dad, the man who had raised me, had let this happen. He had let Sarah run things, and he had let me pay the price for it. I didn't even give it a second thought. I grabbed my phone and texted my dad. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important when you get home. It's urgent." His response came almost immediately. "What's going on?" "I just found the electric bill. It's overdue by 3 months, and I'm the one being asked to pay it." How did this happen? I waited for what felt like an eternity for him to respond. But when he did, it wasn't the answer I expected. "It's not that big of a deal. You can handle it. You've been paying your share, so it makes sense." I read the message again, my heart sinking. How could you not tell me? How long has this been going on? He didn't reply right away, but when he did, his message was blunt, almost dismissive. "Sarah and I are trying to keep things together. You're an adult. You can handle it." I stared at the screen in disbelief. That was it. I wasn't even a person to him anymore. I wasn't his daughter. I was a tool for him to use when it was convenient, and when it wasn't, I was left to deal with the fallout. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was Sarah. She must have seen the texts because her message was waiting for me. "Emily, please. We're doing the best we can. The bills got mixed up, but you're helping us out. You can handle it. You've been so great about everything." My blood boiled. "You can't just keep dumping this on me, Sarah. I'm not your bank account. I'm asking you to help, Emily. Don't make this harder than it has to be." That was the final straw. I had been quiet for too long. I had let them walk all over me for months. And now they were trying to act like it was all normal. They had crossed a line. When Dad came home that night, I was waiting for him. He walked through the door, his eyes tired from a long day's work. He barely looked at me as he dropped his keys on the counter and walked past me into the living room. I stood up from the kitchen table, where I had been sitting, the bill still in my hands. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I needed him to understand. I needed him to see what he had done. "Dad, we need to talk." He looked at me, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Not now, Emily. I'm tired." "No, now." I stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "This has gone too far." "I can't keep doing this for you. For Sarah." He paused, then sighed. "What are you talking about?" I held out the bill, shaking with anger. "This. I'm the one paying for everything. The water bill, the electricity, the groceries. This isn't my responsibility. I've been working myself to the bone while you and Sarah just sit back and take advantage of me." He frowned, his face hardening. You knew the situation when we moved in. This is how family works. No, Dad, I said, my voice trembling with frustration. This isn't family. This is you using me. You haven't asked me for my opinion once. You've just decided that I'll take care of everything. And now I'm the one paying for your mistakes. You don't get to use me like this anymore. He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head. You're being selfish, Emily. We're all trying our best. You think you're the only one struggling? I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I'm not the one who decided to bring someone else's kids into my life. I'm not the one who agreed to let them run up bills in my name. I've been the one holding everything together while you pretend everything's fine. The silence that followed felt suffocating. My dad's face tightened as he processed my words, and for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, he would understand. But then he spoke, his voice cold and cutting. If you can't handle this, then maybe it's better if you leave. You're making this harder than it needs to be. You're breaking up the family. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I was no longer his daughter. I was just another obstacle to his happiness. I had never felt more alone in my entire life. I didn't say another word. I grabbed my bag, and without looking back, I walked out. It was time to stop begging for respect. It was time to take control of my life, because at the end of the day, I was the only one who cared enough to save myself. I didn't look back as I left that night. The betrayal was too deep, too final. But as I walked out into the night, a sense of clarity washed over me. I was done. Done being used. Done being ignored. It was time to take control of my life, even if it meant walking away from the family I thought I knew. The only thing I had left now was myself. And for the first time in months, that was enough. The night air was crisp as I drove around aimlessly, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I had made the decision to leave, but I wasn't sure what was next. The feeling of being betrayed by my own family, by my dad, of all people, still weighed heavily on my chest. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to confront them. I needed to make it clear that I wasn't going to be their financial safety net anymore, that I wasn't going to be used for their convenience. I needed to take control of my life, even if it meant walking away from everything I thought I knew. I didn't give myself time to second guess. The next day, I went back to the house, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I had to do, but that didn't make it any easier. I parked my car in the driveway and took a deep breath before heading inside. As I stepped into the living room, my dad was sitting on the couch watching TV. Sarah was in the kitchen making lunch, and the boys were playing in the next room. It all looked so normal, so comfortable, but I knew it was all an illusion. "Dad?" I said, my voice steady but firm. He turned to look at me, raising an eyebrow. "What is it, Em? I thought you were out with friends." "I need to talk to you," I said, walking into the living room. I could feel the tension building as I spoke. This was it. No turning back. Sarah came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked at me curiously, but didn't say anything. Tim and Ben were still running around in the other room, but I could feel their eyes on me through the cracks in the door. It was like everyone in the house was waiting for what I had to say. I didn't waste any time. "I'm done," I said, the words cutting through the air like a knife. "I'm done paying your bills. I'm done picking up the slack for everything you and Sarah can't manage." Dad's face hardened. "What are you talking about, Emily? We're a family. We help each other out." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You've been taking advantage of me. I've been paying for everything. Groceries, electricity, water bills, and all while I've been expected to do everything for this house. You and Sarah don't even notice because it's all just expected of me. But I'm done. I've been helping for far too long." He stood up, his face turning red. "You're being ungrateful, Emily. We've given you a roof over your head, and all we've asked is for you to pitch in." "Pitch in?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're using me, Dad. You've been using me for months, and now you're acting like I'm the one who's in the wrong? I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be responsible for everyone else's problems. I've been paying rent in this house, working multiple jobs, and you've just kept piling on more. You've been giving Sarah and the kids everything, and I'm left with nothing." I could see the anger flickering in his eyes. But there was something else too, a sense of disbelief, like he couldn't understand where I was coming from. "This is ridiculous, Emily," he snapped. "I'm your father. I'm the one who's been providing for you. You're not just going to walk out of here and leave me to handle everything alone." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I wasn't going to let him guilt trip me anymore. You've been treating me like I don't matter, I said, my voice shaking. And I've had enough. I'm moving out. I'm cutting you off. I'm not paying another dime. I've been the one keeping this house together while you and Sarah just waltz through life without a care in the world. Well, no more. Sarah walked over to stand beside Dad, her arms crossed. You're being so dramatic, Emily. You think we're not trying? We're doing the best we can with what we've got. You've always had it easy. You're just throwing a tantrum. I couldn't believe it. A tantrum? I said, my voice rising again. You've got the nerve to call me dramatic when you've been taking advantage of me. You've been using me as a crutch, and I'm done. You don't get to walk all over me anymore. You think you can just walk away and everything will be fine? Sarah said, her voice laced with disdain. You don't even care what this is doing to the family. We're struggling, Emily. We don't have anyone else to turn to. Well, maybe it's time you figured it out, I said, my voice cold. I'm not your solution anymore. You need to start taking responsibility for your own lives, not just expecting me to clean up the mess. I've given enough. I turned to my dad, who was standing there in stunned silence. And you, Dad, I said, my voice quieter now. You're my father, but you've been treating me like I'm just a source of money, a resource to be used. I'm not going to sit here and let you make me feel like this anymore. I deserve better than that. For a moment, it was silent. Dad looked at me, then at Sarah, and then back at me. His expression was unreadable, but I could see the anger in his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. I'm moving out, I repeated, my tone final. You don't have to worry about me anymore. I turned and walked out of the living room without another word. I didn't look back as I grabbed my things and left the house. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as I drove away, the anger and hurt slowly dissolving as I put distance between myself and the family I had tried so hard to make things work with. The next day, I found a place to rent. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I didn't need much. I just needed a space where I could be myself again, where I could finally breathe without the constant pressure of being taken for granted. That evening, as I unpacked my things in my new apartment, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Dad. You're making a huge mistake, Emily. You're abandoning the family. We've always helped you when you needed it. But you can't even give us a little bit of help when we need it? I stared at the screen for a moment, the weight of his words hitting me hard, but then I remembered what I had just done. I had finally stood up for myself, and I wasn't going to let his guilt trips change that. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had made my choice. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This was the right decision. I was taking back control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me again. For the first time, I could finally breathe. It's been 6 months since I left. 6 months since I made the decision to finally walk away from the family I had tried so hard to make work. In that time, I've done more for myself than I ever thought I could. And as I sit here in my cozy little apartment, surrounded by my own things, I can't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. When I left that house, I was scared, terrified, really. I didn't know how I was going to make it on my own. I didn't know if I'd be able to pay rent, if I'd be able to find a balance between work and my personal life, or if I'd be able to make this new life I was building actually work. But now, with every day that passes, I realize just how much strength I've had all along. My apartment isn't anything fancy. It's small, but it's mine. And that's something I've never had before. It's quiet. I can walk in and leave things wherever I want without worrying about stepping on someone else's mess. The peace here is something I never thought I'd experience, but now I can't imagine living any other way. I threw myself into my work after I left. I've always been driven, but the pressure of keeping up with the bills for everyone else had left me exhausted and unmotivated. Now, with my mind clear and my focus restored, I've been able to dedicate more time to my career, and it's paid off. I've gotten multiple freelance clients, and my work is finally starting to gain recognition. My portfolio has expanded, and I'm making more money than I ever did when I was juggling multiple jobs to pay bills for other people. But it's not just my career that's thriving. I've also been able to rebuild my confidence. When I was living with my dad, I felt small, invisible. Now, I wake up every day knowing I'm in control of my own life. I've started doing things for me, going to the gym, learning new skills, taking on projects I'm passionate about. I've even started taking some weekend trips on my own, visiting places I've always wanted to see. It's liberating to do what I want, when I want, without feeling like I have to sacrifice everything for others. One of the biggest changes has been my perspective on family. I used to feel guilty, as though I was abandoning them by leaving. But now, I realize that sometimes you have to put yourself first. It's not selfish, it's necessary. I've had some tough conversations with my dad since I moved out. He still texts me, trying to convince me to come back, to make things right. But I know now that I don't owe anyone an explanation for my decision. I'm not responsible for their happiness or their choices. They are. Last week, I got an email from a company I had applied to months ago. They offered me a full-time position. I was ecstatic. It's the kind of opportunity I would have been too scared to pursue before, always holding myself back because I thought I needed to keep my family happy. But now, I'm ready to step into a new chapter of my life where I'm no longer weighed down by guilt or resentment. When I look at where I am now, I'm filled with pride. I've worked hard to get here, and I'm finally starting to see the fruits of my labor. I'm building a future for myself, and I'm not waiting for anyone's approval. I don't need to be someone's backup plan or their emotional crutch anymore. I am enough, just as I am. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in my life, I'm excited to find out. Because I'm living it on my own terms now, and that's something no one can take away from me.